Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. Those standing at the back, I'm pretty sure that there are some vacant seats scattered around the hall, so if you can try to find one, that would be great. But it's great to see you all today. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everyone, and thank you for making the time to be here today. And I'd like to first of all start by introducing myself. I'm Anas Al-Tikriti. I'm the CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation, one of three organizations that are hosting this event: the Cordoba Foundation, Middle East Monitor, and One World, whom I'll introduce briefly in a second's time. However, if I may, and this is not on the program, so do forgive me ad-libbing somewhat. If I may, I'd like to ask everyone to observe a moment's silence for the Muslims to read and recite Al-Fatiha, for those and all others to observe and to remember those that have been killed senselessly over the past 8 months now, the tens of thousands who have been declared dead and the thousands who are still under the rubble, probably many of whom never to be found. So let's observe a moment's silence, if I may. Bismillah. Thank you very much, everyone, and once again, welcome to this event where we launch, and we are honored to launch, the new book by Ilan Pappé. Again, I'll be introducing very, very shortly. On behalf of the Cordoba Foundation, Memo, and One World, this is a pleasure to be here and to have you all today. Ilan, congratulations on the new book. I've managed to skim through. I got my copy 2 days ago, and I've spent a few hours skimming through. It's a fantastic read. And once again, this adds to your catalog of publications on this and many quite pertinent and important issues which add to the list on this particular issue which we live every single day. So well done, and thank you very much for agreeing to come here to London today in order to launch the book. There'll be the possibility and opportunity to buy and to get signed copies of the book. Today they're at a special price of £30. So I urge you all to take full advantage of this and maybe remember those whom you wish to gift and to present the book. Also, congratulations to One World Publications for publishing this quite important book. And at this point, I'd like to welcome and thank each one of our panelists. Of course, Professor Ilan Pappé, but also Dr. Ghada Karmi, Dr. Noor and Professor Noor Masalha, and if I may also thank our co-host for tonight, Dr. Dawood Abdullah, on behalf of Middle East Monitor. Just a few lines on the hosts of today's event. The Cordoba Foundation, we were established 18 years ago in 2006 as an independent public relations, research and policy think tank, promoting intercultural dialogue and positive coexistence among civilizations, ideas, cultures, and people. It's an advocate of dialogue and action to promote understanding and acceptance of intercommunal and interreligious issues in Britain, Europe, US, and beyond. Memo, the Middle East Monitor, is a London-based news agency founded in 2009, which works to counter distorted coverage of the Middle East in Western media. Through its website and publications, Memo provides commentary, analysis, and news from experts on the region focused on issues relating to Palestine and the wider territory and region. One World Publications, founded in 1986 by husband and wife team Juliet Maybe and Novin Dustar. One World is an independent publishing house focusing on stimulating non-fiction, publishing over 100 books a year. One World is known for great writing, editorial excellence, high production values, and marketing flair to produce books that are read by the intellectually curious, and if today's book is anything to go by, that is fully deserved. So thank you very much to all the hosts today, and I think it's only fair to also thank the venue for today, the Hallam Conference Center, for accommodating us. It's a fantastic place. I have to say that we've been around London, and this is definitely one of the most outstanding venues that we've visited. So thank you to everyone who is part of this. This event is live streamed by, people can find it on our YouTube channel, the Cordoba Foundation, as well as a Facebook page. We have with us Al Jazeera Mubashir, whom we welcome, also Al Hiwar TV, whom we also welcome, and Memo online platforms. The recording of this event later on will be made available, so I urge you to look out for it on the different online platforms. The format for today will be quite straightforward. After I hand over to the co-host, Dr. Dawood Abdullah, who will say a few words, I'll introduce the author of today's book, who will speak for about half an hour to 35, probably 40 minutes. After which, I will invite our respondents, Dr. Ghada Kermi, as well as Professor Noor Masalha, to each give an 8 to 10 minutes response to Professor Ilan Pape's introduction, after which we'll open the floor for questions and answers, and we hope to conclude by 8:45 latest. So that's basically the format for today. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Dawood Abdullah to say a few words. You just speak.
Thank you, Anas. And good evening, everyone. It's also a pleasure for me to welcome you to this important and timely book launch by Professor Pape. It's timely because not since 2007, when John Mshaima and Stephen Walt wrote their study on the lobby and its influence on United States foreign policy, no one has attempted to write a comprehensive and illuminating work and analysis of the lobby. Professor Pape has gone further. He's not just revisited the lobby and its operations in the United States, but he has examined its operations in Europe and in Britain in particular, especially. And in this sense, this book is unique and very much welcome. What he does throughout the chapters, he gives us an insight into how this very obscure and uninfluential theological doctrine evolved over the years to become a major political force across the Atlantic, on both sides of the Atlantic. What were the forces that led to its development in such a manner? Of course, not many people would like to speak about this, let alone write about it. Professor Pape is not one to be subjected to threats, as is very common in our world today, or bribes. And this is something he has mentioned in the book. We are very pleased and honored to have two very distinguished discussants, Professor Karmi, who Ilan mentions in the book several times because of her work in England in the 70s and 80s on behalf of Palestine and the wider Arab community. And then we have Professor Noor Masala, who has written himself, like Ilan, on the displacement of Palestinians, the right of return, and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So we are truly honored and blessed, as it were, to have these important and distinguished speakers. We welcome you, and we hope that you take all the good fruits that you would acquire from listening to our author as well as discussants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Dawood, the Director of Middle East Monitor, and thank you for your cooperation and your hosting of this event. And without further ado, my dear friends, I think we're here, all of us, for one main reason, and that is to listen to Professor Ilan Pappé, whom I'm sure many of you know, but nonetheless, allow me to introduce. He's the author of Lobbying for Zionism. He's an Israeli historian and socialist activist. He is a professor of history at the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at Exeter University. He's the director of the university's European Center for Palestinian Studies and co-director of the Exeter Center for Ethno-Political Studies. Professor Pappé is the author of several books, including the best-selling The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, which is an incredible, one of my favorites, and something I would definitely recommend for those who haven't already read it. Also published by One World. A History of Modern Palestine, published by Cambridge University. The Israel-Palestine Question by Routledge. The Forgotten Palestinians, A History of the Palestinians in Israel by Yale. And with Noam Chomsky, Gaza in Crisis, Reflections on Israel's War Against the Palestinians, published by Penguin. Now, before I hand over to him, I believe that we are all fully aware of the catastrophe that is unfolding hour by hour before our very eyes. We're not talking about, I mean, Ilan Pappé is a well-known historian, but we're not talking today necessarily about something which is in the folds of history. We're talking about something that is very, very current. And the roots of which, and I believe that more and more people have come to recognize and acknowledge, the roots of which are matters which Professor Pappé, as well as many others, have documented and have written about for decades now, including, by the way, our own Dr. Dawood Abdallah, as well as obviously Dr. Ghada Karmi and Professor Masalha. So it's not, these aren't secrets, these aren't unknowns. However, it seems that something as tragic as Gaza over the past 8 months was required so that people start to ask the pertinent questions, the real questions, and to pose the real arguments. I won't take any much more time, but I would like to invite Professor Ilan Pappé to speak for approximately 30 to 35 minutes. So please, Professor Pappé.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anas. Thank you, the Cordova Foundation, Middle East Monitor, the Halal Center. Special thanks to my dear friends, Rada and Noor, for sharing the podium, and Dr. Dawood Abdallah and One World for enabling me to publish this book. I'm particularly moved by having the friends here with me on the panel. I think I met Rada in 1981 for the first time. You can calculate the years. We don't want to calculate the years. We met at the House of Parliament, of all places, by an event, I don't know if you remember, Rada, organized by The Spectator, with the PLO representative at the time. Rada was aware of something I wasn't aware when we met, when I told her, because she liked much of what I said already in 1981, and I said to her, you see, not all the Zionists are bad. And Rada said to me, you might not be a Zionist, but you don't know it. And it took some time before I realized myself that actually the views I expressed could not have been defined as Zionist ideas. But it took time for me to liberate myself from that ideology. And as already mentioned, I rather appeared again in the book and at the time in the UK when it was very difficult to speak for Palestine, to stand for Palestine. And it took a lot of courage and a lot of effort and commitment to insist that Palestine should be represented in the public domain, in the media, in politics, and we are standing on wide shoulders today due to the immense and incredible work by activists like Dr. Rada Karmi. It gives me also great pleasure to see my dear friend Noor. I was trying to remember when I met you first, but it's also in the very distant past. Although Noor and I were born not far away from each other geographically, I think we only met outside of Palestine. What I do remember is that Noor and I participated in a very naive effort by our dear friend Edward, the late Edward Said. He was sometimes naive. He brought Israeli and Palestinian historians to Paris in 1999. We won't mention the names of the Israeli historians.
97, I think.
97,
Paris, yeah.
in Paris. And he thought that there was a common ground to agree about the version of history, if you remember, Noor. And he was deeply, deeply disappointed that there was no common ground. And this is important. For him, it was important, because at that time, together with Daniel Birnbaum, may he live long, they thought that they found a recipe for coexistence that was not very relevant to the reality on the ground. And Dr. Daoud, I think you invited me many years ago for a conference in London, and it was for me the first experience of being introduced to the world of the Muslim community in Britain, and its very special commitment and devotion to the Palestine question. It opened for me a new world of alliances, friendships, and winning the confidence of the community is something I really cherish and appreciate. And without the help of this community, it would have been very difficult for me to withstand the kind of pressures that all of us are witnessing when we speak freely and truthfully for Palestine. So thank you all for being here, and I really appreciate it. I wanted to write this book because of a conundrum that really interested me and intrigued me over the years. How come a state that is declared to be a high-tech state with the strongest army in the Middle East, with the full support of the United States and the West, still tries to advocate for its legitimacy so many years after? Why is this lack of certainty by the state itself and whoever represents it that maybe its legitimacy is questioned, on the one hand? On the other hand, why the Palestinian case and cause, which is very simple in many ways and very easy to understand as a basic moral issue, still does not succeed to become a legitimate cause in so many places where decisions are made, where policies are pursued. I thought that this kind of conundrum needs not a soundbite answer, which usually we need to give under the pressure of media and so on, but maybe I need to go back in history and very slowly reconstruct the history of lobbying for Zionism to try and understand why today we are where we are. And this is why I apologize for the length of the book. I know that many people don't like to read books at all, and many people don't like to read long books. There's sometimes people who prefer just to look at the screen of the smartphone. It's not an SMS book, but I do hope that the patient will pay, because you need to really go step by step from the beginning to understand the longevity of the lobby, its effectiveness, but maybe hopefully also realize its deficiencies and weaknesses so that we have a hopeful vision for the future and not just lament all the time what is true, the total imbalance of power on the ground, in the region, in the global system that explains why we are where we are today. Another reasons for the rather length of the book is the fact that I wanted to bring long citations from British and American politicians in particular, both those who supported Zionism, but also those who opposed Zionism. It's amazing to read statements by both sides of the argument from 1900 or 1905, which are really prophetic in the sense of understanding what the support for a Jewish state in Palestine would do to the Palestinians and to the area as a whole, understanding what kind of complication it would create for the Jewish communities wherever they are. So you have these people with, ability which is incredible at a given moment in history to see beyond the moment, to see into the future, and it gives you a sense, and I think, Anas, that connects well to what you were saying, that we are still in that historical chapter. It's not, we don't have a closure for that chapter, and I could call this chapter the Western idea that the problem of the Jews in the West can only be solved by colonizing Palestine at the expense of the Palestinians, and how would we continue to defend this horrible idea and give immunity to its practices and policies against the Palestinians wherever they are. And although I was familiar myself with many chapters in the history both of Palestine and of Zionism, I was still surprised to be reminded of certain stages in the progress of the lobbying for Zionism which really ring true today and relevant today. For instance, the fact that Zionism began as an evangelical Christian project before it became a Jewish one. That the whole idea that the return of the Jews to Palestine is part of a divine scheme that will precipitate the second coming of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, and maybe the beginning of 1,000 years of Jesus' rule on earth. Now, it was not every evangelical stream in thinking that thought that way, but it was an important part of evangelical Christianity, beginning in Britain and transformed into the United States by people who at first you could call them theologians rather than politicians, but very soon some of them became politicians of importance, and they, especially in Britain, they provided a certain theological justification for a new imperial thinking, not just about Palestine, but of the whole Eastern Mediterranean, the Mashreq. Because the British basic view on the Eastern Mediterranean throughout the 19th century was that although the Ottoman Empire that ruled that area was in decline, it was better to keep it intact, because a disintegration of the empire would create a struggle for spoils among the European powers and could lead to something which would be called later on a world war, which in fact is what happened. But the pressure of those evangelical Christians who, together with British imperialists, who thought that it's time to cede from the Ottoman Empire the Eastern Mediterranean, brought together, first of all, a non-Jewish support for the idea of what they would call the return of the Jews to Palestine and the replacement of the Palestinian with a Jewish kingdom or state or republic, depends on who we are talking about. Now, it means that already throughout the 19th century, people were discussing the fate of Palestine and the Palestinians without the Palestinians being aware that they are becoming a regional project or even a global project of colonization. And I was surprised to see how much this kind of thinking influenced the early Jewish supporters of Zionism, because I always thought that this were kind of two discrete projects that had nothing to do with it. But then I read a diary by one of the most important early Zionists, Eliezer ben Yehuda, who reinvented the Hebrew language. He was very much influenced by evangelical Christianity and changed his mind about Zionism in the sense that he said, yes, we should redefine Judaism, not as a religion, but as a nationalism, but I think they're right, it should happen in Palestine and not anywhere else. So there was an impact of that kind of thinking, the imperial thinking, the theological thinking, coming from Christianity on the very nascent, very small number of Jewish intellectuals who thought that the best solution for anti-Semitism in Central and Eastern Europe was to create or establish a Jewish state in Palestine. So that's the beginning, which, as you can probably understand today, is not just an intellectual or an interesting forgotten chapter of the past. It's still a very relevant alliance that is still working today. By the way, not only in the United States, where we are all familiar with the term Christian Zionists as a lobby that supports Israel. You go to Sweden, you go to Denmark, you go to Norway. Christian Zionism is alive in Europe and in the United Kingdom as well as an idea that supports Israel unconditionally in the name of the same theology that began the whole Zionist project. To my surprise, when I was in Malaysia, I met leaders of the Christian community in Malaysia, and they also are very much under the influence of Christian Zionists in that respect. So this is an alliance of the past which is still steadfast today. The second, again, note in the book that reminded me of things that I've forgotten and I thought are very relevant for today is the insistence of every leading figure in the Anglo-Jewish community and also in some of the Western Jewish communities, people with status, with position, some of them ministers in cabinet, some of them important business figures in their society. I was surprised to be reminded that they made sure that everybody would understand that they themselves would never go to Palestine, that they felt safe in Britain, that they saw no reason whatsoever to create a Jewish state because they had a problem as an Anglo-Jewish community, and far worse and most cynically and most sinisterly, they said if there won't be a Jewish state in Palestine, the poor Jews that are subjected to anti-Semitism in Central and Eastern Europe would come to Britain. God forbid. And they are poor. We would have to take care of them. After 1905, the sense was that these poor Jews are also Bolsheviks, so they would steer problems for Britain as a whole and the Jewish community at it. And therefore, it's quite incredible to go back to the material itself and to see it word by word written in explaining to British policymakers, German policymakers, and so on, this is good for Europe because we don't want the poor East European Jews to come to the West or to the United States when I started looking for the origins of the pro-Zionist lobby in the United States. So this is important because, again, it sounds like a distant chapter in the past, but it's very much a relevant issue today, isn't it? I mean, the whole connection between the Anglo-Jewish community and Israel, and this whole walking on eggshells when we begin to talk earnestly and honestly and actually are against racism, not because we are racist, that you cannot be an ambassador, an ambassadress for Israel, and at the same time claim that all you care is for the interests of the Anglo-Jewish community. And anybody who points out to this kind of connection is immediately branded as an anti-Semite, or in my case, as a self-hating Jew. This is something that we should not be afraid to talk about, because this is very, very important. I won't mention name, but if you are familiar with what goes on in the Labour Party now, a full lobbyist for Israel is going to be one of the most powerful members of the Labour Party. I don't want to get into names. It's not important. The name is not important. What is important, that for 100 years, people who were part of the organization of the lobbying for Zionism, later for Israel, also played a very important role in British politics, and so no contradiction in representing the interests of a foreign country and a foreign state, and a state that commits crimes against humanity and war crimes, and at the same time serving as civil servants or politicians of Britain. Everybody says, well, when you're going into this, you are going into the territory of conspiracies, and that leads us to the old accusations of anti-Semitism against the Jews. No, this is why we write books like this. This is why we insist that this is a scholarly work, pedantic work, that is not falling into any conspiracy theories. It's just examining the evidence in history to show that this is a connection that is problematic, not just for the Palestinians, but also for the Jews in Britain. And I think we have now a younger generation, at least of American Jews, who fully comprehend and understand this problem, and fully acknowledge that this has not served well the American Jewish community to be the ambassadors and ambassadresses for Israel, and they just jettisoned their connection to Zionism, and many of them feel that in order to show where they are today, they also want to take full part in the solidarity movement with the Palestinians. So not just saying Judaism is not Zionism, our Judaism put us in the forefront in the struggle for liberation and freedom in Palestine. A third point that I wanted, and I follow your clock very carefully here, so keep it alive. It helps me. I used to think that socialism or social democracy and labor movement in Britain would go together with universal values that I cherish. Human rights, civil rights, workers' rights. And it's only when I went into the history of the Labour Party before the creation of the State of Israel, and especially in the early years of statehood, when the Labour Friends of Israel were established in the early 1950s, that I realized how important was this. Today I think we'll call it gaslighting. You know, this social democratic gaslighting. What do I mean by this? You have really the pillars of British socialism, really the pillars of British socialism, who, for instance, would definitely condemn apartheid in South Africa, fully supporting Israel to the extent that any attempt to show, as Rada and her friends would, any sympathy, empathy, a wish to with the Palestinians, a wish to represent the Palestinian cause, would immediately be destroyed by these particular leaders of socialism in Britain. It gives you some kind of a more profound and deeper understanding for the Jeremy Corbyn, or the attack on Jeremy Corbyn. It's not a new phenomenon. There are roots there of social democrats, by the way, not only in Britain, in Europe as a whole, providing a shield of immunity to Zionism in the name of social democratic principles. This is far worse than the right-wing support for Israel. The fascist right-wing support that Israel enjoys today, and maybe enjoyed a bit in the past, is easy to challenge, is easy to deal with, because you immediately say, you see who the allies are of this state, who is the allies of this ideology. But when the ideology that is being mentioned and quoted to explain why Israel is supported is one that you can identify with as a human being, then it becomes a bit more complicated. And it was very difficult, I think, for anybody challenging the support for Zionism and support for Israel when it came from either liberal or social democrat circles. And I wasn't aware of this, how deep it went into the Labour Party, even before the creation of the Conservative Friends of Israel, who are now the most important lobby for Israel in Britain, but how important the Labour Friends of Israel. Not to mention the specific outfits that joined the TUC, the Trade Union Council. The trade unions in Britain were giving affiliation to pre-state Zionist organizations whose role was before 1948 to advocate for Zionism, but Israel did not dismantle them because it turned it into part of the lobbying for Zionism for Israel in Britain. So you had pure Zionist organization having full affiliation and membership in the TUC, while any attempt to even create, at the beginning, a solidarity circle with the Palestinians in the trade unions was rejected as political and unacceptable. Unbelievable if you go back to it. And this is a time when people already visited Palestine and Israel. It was at the time when people began to understand what was going on. Of course, it became a bit more difficult when it was easier to visit and easier to get information what was going on. But even then, it was not yet over for the Labour Party to show unconditional support for oppression, apartheid, colonization, ethnic cleansing, and nowadays, not to speak openly and bravely about the genocide in Palestine. Shame on them and shame on this leadership that doesn't even have one word to say. But it has an historical root for this, and I think it's very important. Finally, I think that I want also to be optimistic, because it's very clear that what I was talking about up to now is a huge, powerful alliance. First included Britain, then the United States, then multinational cooperation. The Palestinians really, were facing an alliance so powerful economically, politically, strategically, and it's all focused on the idea of this project of displacement and replacement, displacing the Palestinians and replacing them. It's almost incredible that they're still there, fighting, showing resilience and resistance. This is also what my book taught me once more, that how unbelievable is the fact that Palestine and the Palestinians are still there. It's not taken for granted. But what brings me hope, and for me, hope, I want to explain that nobody misunderstand what I mean for me. Hope for me is the end of Israel and the creation of a free Palestine from the river to the sea. What brings me hope is the fact that the powerful lobby and the alliance were very effective when it comes to politics from above. From the very early on, they understand that all they have to do is follow politicians at the early stages of their career, making sure that they are allies in a later stage in their career, using money, influence, intimidation if needed, in order to get whether the American or the British political system to abide by their demands. However, they find it very difficult, and always found it very difficult, to deal with the civil society. They don't know how to deal with alternative media today. They have no idea how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with civil society, with communal action, with boycott initiatives, with divestment initiatives. All their methodology, all the weaponry that all the armory that they have is useless, it seems, against people. That should give us hope. And the hope is that probably this is not the only issue in which the politicians of this particular era are not representing us well. I don't remember as an historian, at an age like this when politics, and I'm generalizing of course, that politicians were of such a low caliber, intellectually, morally, corrupt, shallow, reductionist, people who have very little to offer their society apart from their own careers. It doesn't matter which party. It's really the age of the lack of any status for the politicians. So their ideas of how to deal with global warming, how to deal with poverty, how to deal with issues that really trouble people are not very interesting and are not very successful and are not very effective because they don't care about these issues, they care about their own careers. It's not surprising that also their ideas about Palestine are irrelevant and are harmful and negative. So we should hope that when people struggle against this lobby, they're also struggling against other lobbies that make their life miserable and disable them to solve problems of poverty, ecological danger, injustices in society beyond the question of Palestine. I think this explains why so many people are galvanized behind the Palestine question as symbolizing struggle against injustices anywhere else in the world as well. And Palestine is an indication that there is a different kind of politics that we would wish for ourselves, for our next generations, and that's why so many hopes are pinned on the Palestinian liberation movement, sometimes probably unreasonably actually, that Palestine would be the, the paragon state that all the other failed decolonized world was unable to fulfill. But it explains, because this is a demand for a different kind of politicians and a different kind of the idea, what is universal justice? This is the big challenge the ICJ and the ICC are having. It's not a coincidence that for the first time they at least provided a stage for what people think about Palestine and not governments, if you think about it. And they did it intentionally. I talked with them, some of them. They did it intentionally. They wanted to show that international tribunals are also listening to people, not just to the politics of power. Hopefully, this is just the beginning of a process that would lead for a better world, first of all for the Palestinians, and then for all of us. Thank you.
Well done. Professor Ilan Pappé, thank you very much. As brilliant as ever. Thank you. And I think if there is any cause to actually read this book line for line, I think that the past half hour has exemplified why that is. And it's important, especially because more and more people, especially younger people, are asking. They're asking questions. They want to understand. There is a thirst. There is an appetite. And I think to lose this moment would be a great, great waste. So please, if you haven't already, do pick up a book on your way out, maybe even a few. And I wish you all the best in your reading endeavors. And our next speaker is someone who will be able to also complement the presentation by Professor Pappé. Ghada Karmi is well known to all of us. She's a Jerusalemite. She's a Maqdisiyya. She was born in Jerusalem and was forced to leave her home with her family as a result of Israel's creation in 1948. She practiced as a doctor for many years, as a specialist in the health of migrants and refugees. She held a number of research appointments on Middle Eastern politics and culture, including at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies, Durham, and Leeds Universities. She was an Associate Fellow of the Royal Institute of International Affairs from 1999 to 2001, leading on a project on Israel-Palestinian reconciliation. In 2009, she became a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Currently, she is a Research Fellow at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at Exeter University. Ghada, you have 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether people can see me because I'm so short and, and there are cameras and things in the way. Do you want me to stand? Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that a kind introduction. Just one correction. I am no longer at the University of Exeter. I was with Ilan for a while, but I am no longer there. Well, first of all, what I want to do is to congratulate you, Ilan, on this extremely impressive and important book about a very, very important subject. I really found it very informative. I had always imagined that I was somebody who was fairly knowledgeable about some of the issues in the book, but really I'm not. I learned quite a lot, and I know anybody who reads it will feel the same as I do, especially, by the way, your sections on the origins of Christian Zionism, both in Britain and in the United States. Very important. But I must tell you that while I was reading it, I found myself thinking about the Palestinian people, these poor people who, you know, overall, Palestine's population was agrarian. It was not composed of sophisticated professionals and academics and smart journalists. It was simple people who could not possibly have understood the extraordinary complexity of the beliefs, the ideology, the ideas that you've talked about. My grandfather came to my mind. My grandfather was a sort of owned a lot of farming land, but himself farmed it as well with peasants. Now, when I remember, and I think about him, I never met him, unfortunately, but when I think about him, perhaps at the end of a day, sitting there with a cup of coffee and a chat, good God, how could such a man have ever remotely imagined the plans that were being laid miles away in Europe for people like him? It's really very sad, that side of the story, apart from anything else. Now, the question of the role of Christianity, which you bring out very well, really is extremely important. We must not forget, because in those early Christian Zionists, but also the Christian world in general, there are certain ideas that are implanted from very early on in life, except if you belong to that small minority of communists and socialists and so on, Marxists. The generality of people were familiar with the concepts of the Old Testament, the Bible, Jesus, the Holy Land, all this stuff. You know, you don't stand a chance when faced with this. This goes so deep that when you then stir it a little bit with the return of the Jews, you know, back to the homeland, etc., it's not a very difficult concept for them to absorb. And what impressed me so much was the depth of this, how deep it goes, how difficult to entrench these ideas, to unplug this kind of childhood religious, even if you didn't practice the religion, but that familiarity with these concepts, how very difficult the task is. It's huge, it's monumental. Various other things I want to point out. I'm very interested in the way that you point out repeatedly in the book that the Palestinians were never considered. And you're quite right, of course, they were never considered. All these plans were being done over their heads. They had no idea that any of this was happening. But there was another group of people who were also not considered, from what I can see, and that is the Arab Jews. The Jewish communities in the Arab world didn't feature at all it seems to me, in Zionist thinking and in this planning and in the way that Western politicians were influenced. You know, what you do realize is the sort of Jews they were talking about were East European and Central European Jews. And this is very interesting. It's very interesting to me personally because, of course, that group who lived beyond the Pale and Poland, Russia, Lithuania, etc., were the closest thing you would have had to a subgroup or a community which could lead you into fantasizing that you were a separate race. That's where that comes from. And that, it seemed to me, by inference, was what you were really saying. So this was, it seems, it was never raised. This group of Jews were never consulted or considered at all. Now, other points, because I know I haven't got much time, that I want to raise, and that comes across very, very strongly, not for the first time in my life, I must say, but comes across, reminds me again, refreshes that thought in your book. You know, the tenacity with which the Zionists fought for setting up the Jewish state in Palestine. I don't know about you, but I do not have a parallel example of people so utterly devoted to an aim that they think about it day and night, they work for it at every conceivable moment. They never miss an opportunity to make it happen, or if they can use it to recruit, to absolutely sleepless devotion to this idea. What is that? What is that about? Because without it, you see, I don't think they would have ever got away with this ridiculous idea. With it, however, it was unceasing, indefatigable, persistent, continuous, day and night, day in, day out. Amazing, amazing. That's really what came across at me. And just, you know, a couple of questions. Is there any other lobby to which we can compare this? Because it would be really interesting to see was there any other cause, is there any other cause which has created the situation of a, I was going to use words which I'll be accused of being anti-Semitic. I mean, with so widespread that you have a movement, the lobby, the activities of the lobby at every level in so many different societies. The reach of this lobby is extraordinary. Is there a parallel case? And of course, finally, something which you could not really have written much about because of the timing of the book, October 7th. Yeah. What effect is this going to have on all the stuff we've been talking about? Because the events of October the 7th have been phenomenal in turning things upside down, in making us understand things in a completely different way, in presenting the world to us in a different way. This is the most extraordinary event in my lifetime, I assure you, and I would think also in yours. Where it's going to lead, I don't know, because it's still unfolding. But the way it's been going so far, it's presented us with fundamental questions about the general order of things that we take for granted, that we have understood the world in a certain way. All of that has been upended. What effect will that have on precisely the kind of setup you've been describing? I wonder about that, and I think that has to be a source of hope, of optimism, because of with change, always, when things are going to happen, you have to have change. Things cannot go on as they are. They will change. There is every indication that the change that October 7th has been bringing about and will bring about is for a much better future, not only for the Palestinian people, but for the whole of humanity.
Thank you very much, Rada. That was excellent. Thank you. Our next respondent is Professor Noor Masalha. He's a Palestinian historian and currently an associate member of the School of African and Oriental Studies, SOAS, University of London. He's the former director of the Center for Religion and History at St. Mary's University. He's interested in memory, and this is fascinating, in memory and social activism, liberating histories, theologies of liberation, history from below, and decolonizing methodologies. He's also the historian commentator in the award-winning documentary film La Terre par les Arabes, which tells the story of the background and build-up to the expulsion of the Palestinians in 1948 and the Nakba. His books include Expulsion of the Palestinians, The Concept of Transfer in Zionist Political Thought, 1882 to 1948, and The Zionist Bible, Biblical Precedent, Colonialism, and the Erasure of Memory. Professor Noor Masalha.
مساء الخير للجميع وألف مبروك لإيلان. ألف مبروك.
Thank you.
This is a great book. The best thing about this book, actually, Ilan actually begins the book with his own experience. And he begins it with a conference in 2014 at Exeter University, conference about settler colonialism in Palestine. 2 weeks before the conference, I met Ilan in London, and he told me that Michael Gove, a cabinet secretary, I think David Cameron was actually Prime Minister, actually phoned Exeter University and tried to either cancel the conference or force the conference to incorporate a Zionist speaker, or Zionist speakers in the conference, actually. Yeah. We have the British government, from within British government, intervening to stop an academic conference, a university which is supposed to be autonomous. We are supposed to be autonomous universities. We're not run by the British government. But that's the brilliant thing about this book is actually incorporating personal experiences, but also being a historian myself, actually, I can sympathize with Ilan quite a lot. And going to the past in order to understand the present and to learn about the future. The past is something that can teach us a lot about the present. An awful lot of the arguments which were constructed by Ilan and by the Zionist lobby in the 1840s. For the first time, we have a Zionist lobby in London, operating from London. Right. And it's a Protestant lobby. It's not about Christianity, my friends. We have Palestinian Christians. We have Christians throughout the Middle East. It's not about Christianity because most Christians are Catholics. There was no sign of Christian Zionism among the Catholics. It was about a particular type of Christianity. And that's the brilliant thing about Iran, is that evangelical Christianity, but also it was millennialist Christianity, end of times Christianity. Christianity which trying to expedite the coming of the Messiah by thinking that the restoration of the Jews to Palestine. By the way, the lobby was called a restorationist lobby. Not a return lobby, not a Zionist lobby. The term Zionism, 1860s, a bit later, about 20, 30 years later, in 1940, we have the Zionist lobby in London led by Lord Shaftesbury, Anthony Ashley Cooper. He was the son-in-law of Lord Palmerston, who was the Foreign Secretary. And we have a great story. I don't know whether you've got it actually in the book or not, because I had the book 2 days ago. I couldn't read everything about it. We have a great story of Palmerston and Ashley Cooper meeting together in London. And both of them are sipping whiskey. And Palmerston was quite dozing off. He was not listening to what Ashley Cooper also was trying to persuade him about the return of the Jews to Palestine, expediting the Messiah, and that's a great thing idea. He wasn't really impressed by the theology. But suddenly Ashley Cooper started to talk about the British Empire and how this would be very useful to the British Empire, having a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This is the story of that theology. It's theology and empire and imperialism. And this is where the Zionist lobby is so important in the 19th century, because this is the height of the British Empire, and also comes to a much later development. This is also a lobby from above. Ashley Cooper was actually an MP, Tory MP. So the lobby starts within the British Parliament. And now we have 200 Tory MPs getting money from the Zionist lobby to go to Israel.
Yeah.
A lot of money pouring into these MPs. Not just the Labour Party, but the Tory Party has the biggest Friends of Israel lobby in the country. I think Ilan didn't want to mention West Streeting. I'll come back to West Streeting, the Labour. And I'll come back to Stoma. I'll come back to fucking Stoma. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry about I'm not that sort
Oh my
of,
God.
but we are electioneering. I'm not that sort of person, but I'll keep it very young. But I think it is important to go back to the history and show how Balfour became a Zionist Christian. In 1906, actually Balfour legislated to stop Jews arriving in Britain. He was anti-Semitic himself, the guy. He didn't want the Jews. That's why we have so many Jews in America, and we have very few Jews in Britain. Most Jews in Britain are the Israelis, by the way, who arrived 20 years ago. But about 200,000 Jews. France has got more Jews. America has got millions of Jews. Latin America, Brazil, Argentina has got more Jews. The British actually was trying, Balfour himself, 1906, Prime Minister Balfour, the famous Balfour of the Balfour Declaration of 1917, actually were trying to stop Jews coming to the UK. But one thing the Zionist lobby does in the 1840s, also racializing the Jews. The Jews are a race, not faith, they claim. Until then, everybody thought the Jews were a faith, like any other faith. You know, the Jews themselves didn't want to go to it. They were waiting for the Messiah to come. They didn't want to go to Palestine. Some of these fundamentalist Jews still don't want to go to Palestine. They carry out placards of liberating Palestine now. But the racialization of the Jews it's very dangerous, because if it's Jews, they can't be integrated in the UK. And that racialization of the Jews became horrific in the Second World War, when they were slaughtered in large numbers. After the Second World War, some Zionists started to talk about ethnicity, the Jewish ethnicity, not faith, ethnicity. But that racialization of the Jews, there is no race without racism, my friends.
True.
The Zionist lobby partly was anti-Semitic. That's St. Balfour. Now, when we come to 1917, and Leland is absolutely right, and he describes in the book, the Zionist lobby is actually operating from within the British cabinet in 1917. We have Mark Sykes, the cabinet secretary, drafting the Balfour Declaration. We have Lloyd George, the tricky Lloyd George, the liberal prime minister, the reformist, the guy who supported the suffragettes, in fact, at the head of the Zionist lobby. We have Weizmann actually also delivering his dispatches to the Zionists of South Africa from the Admiralty. He was working from within the British Royal Mail. It's a lobby operating within government. I hear a lot of Americans who say, why the American presidents actually don't stand up to the Zionist lobby? I hear this stuff. The Zionist lobby was inside the British cabinet, and Churchill was famously also part of that Zionist lobby. And it's clearly that without the British in Palestine between 1918 and 1948, the Israeli state would not have been created. The Palestinian Nakba would have been created. The horrific consequences of Zionism, the genocide in Gaza would not have taken place. The British do bear great responsibility, great blame actually for the Balfour Declaration, for enabling that settler colonial project in Palestine. I mean, we live in Britain, we have British passports, some of our Palestinians, but we feel very bitter about the British and the role of the British. And without the British, before the Americans got onto the act after the Second World War, before the Zionist lobby in America became the most powerful lobby in the world, the Zionist lobby was here, very at the heart of the British establishment. It was supported also by the left, and I think Elon was absolutely right to hint at the left and the Guardian, at the Manchester Guardian, and C.P. Scott, the editor of the Guardian. The Zionist lobby was supported by the left in the old days. The Zionism was supposed to be socialist. Things have changed, by the way. The Zionist lobby in Britain, by and large, is on the right, despite the fact that Keir Starmer, but an awful lot of people think that Keir Starmer has nothing to do with Labour. He's just an imposter. I mean, he's a Zionist, he's a pro-Zionist, but he's not that tradition. The British trade unions today are on the side of Palestine. So things are changing. Things have changed. And I think Elon, towards the end of his brilliant chat, actually hinted at the cracks. An awful lot of cracks are taking place. Another thing about the Zionist lobby in terms of producing argumentation is the idea of a land without people. An awful lot of the Zionist arguments actually were actually concocted by the Christian Zionist lobby. A land without people for a people without, the internationalization of the conflict. And I think Elon is hinting at the cracks and the collapse of this international lobby, the fact that the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the UN actually talking about genocide, the mass student movement in the US and in Britain, the encampments in Britain, which is forcing a lot of these colleges to disclose investments in the Israeli arm industry. The fact that hundreds, we've got 1,000 British lawyers and some British judges, they're not intimidated anymore by the Zionist lobby. They are prepared to stand up. We have a High Court British judge, Lady Hale, I think, is part of that 1,000. We have an awful lot of indications that the Zionist lobby is not in control of the discourse on Palestine at the moment. Okay, it's very powerful, it's still very powerful, it's still exercising an enormous amount of protection for apartheid Israel, for the crimes of the Israeli state in Gaza. But they're not entirely in control of the discourse, the public discourse, the discourse from below, the civil society discourse in the US and in Britain. And Britain has been leading their demonstrations. We had the biggest demonstrations in the world, actually, on the question of Palestine every 2-3 weeks. Britain, which supported that settler colonial genocidal project, is actually from below, is actually leading the struggle. It's amazing. All the trade unions, most of them are affiliated with the PSC, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Things have changing, things are changing. There are the signs, these are the signs, these are the things we should be pushing in order to dismantle that Zionist lobby in Britain. And I'll stop at this point.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Noor Masalha. I mean, today's panel was absolutely fantastic. I'm sure you agree. Just a few points before I open the floor for questioning. We do want to make the most of the time that we have. The first is, and I think this has been mentioned, and Professor Masalha just reiterated, I'm, in another world, I'm an activist. Many of you will know. I post today, I'm an imposter today as an academic. But in reality, I'm an activist, and I'm proud to be part of those demonstrations. And I have to say that the most solid, the strongest, amongst the many elements that make up these demonstrations are the non-Zionist Jews. And it is to them that we owe a huge debt, because they are the ones whom we point to whenever we're accused of anti-Semitism. So really a huge salute to them. And also, I think that today, the fact that everyone here today is an academic and that we come from various universities, the student movement up and down the country and across the United States. And let's not forget that these are the soon to become the leaders, political, societal, economic. These are soon to become the leaders of our countries. And if they were equipped with the right set of questions, the right set of answers, then, who knows? I'm, just as hopeful as Ilan expressed. So, again, saluting them from today. I'd like to point to two things before I open the door to questions. The first is, I urge you all, for those who haven't already, please do go back and watch the Labour Files, which was done by Al Jazeera a few years back, 3-part series, which is absolutely eye-opening. I would urge you to watch and also to share that documentary. Also, last week, an article published in the Middle East Eye, and Middle East Eye are amongst us today also, by David Hurst, the historian, about whether today's Zionists are going the way of yesterday's Crusaders. I think an important, quite fantastic historical essay. So those are a few points. Now, the rules are as such. We will take questions and try, please, not to go into statements, long statements. Questions. If you wish, direct them to either Ilan or to any one of the panels. I'm going to bring in all of today's panels in answering and addressing the questions and statements brought up. I'll take them in batches of 3. And I'll try to come from various places of the hall. We have roving mics. Who's in charge of the roving mic? Yes? Okay, Kieran. I'm going to start with the gentleman here on my right, and then I'm going to go to the gentleman there at the back, and then the lady there in the 4th row.
Thank you very much to all the panel members, especially Ilan Pape. Until I'd read your books, 10 Myths About Israel and the Ethnic Cleansing, I think many years of longing for a comprehensive answer hadn't been answered, but yours did. So thank you very much. For many of us growing in the 70s and 80s, campaigning on the ground, we didn't have that. So this is brilliant. I'm very jealous of the fact that the book has already come out and I haven't seen it, but I saw it in someone's table yesterday, but I'm also here to read it thoroughly. But I've actually interrupted my campaign trail. I'm standing as an independent candidate in Bethnal Green and Stepney in this election, trying to give Keir Starmer's Labour Party a bloody nose in this election. Ilan, I know you are an amazing person. I would like to invite you to our, but would it be wrong in echoing what you had just said, and that is true freedom will come for the Palestinians when we see the end of Israel?
Thank you. Ajmal Masroor, thank you very much, and all the best with your campaign. The gentleman there at the back, yes, please. And then the lady here in the front, 4th row. أسئلة كل 3 أسئلة. Every 3 questions.
Sorry, my question is, in your research, have you found examples of exceptionally strange bedfellows and alliances for Zionism? For example, in India, the Hindutva alliance, which is ironic because they're fans of Hitler. So are there other examples that you've seen in other parts of the world?
Thank you very much. And the lady here. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for an illuminating book. Ilan, you speak about the collapse of the Zionist project as being imminent and Jews and Arabs living together in a free Palestine. And indeed, that's the hope for all of us, I'm sure, that are here. But for a historian, we also are very cognizant that millions of people around the world support this. The issue is, what is the political agency that is going to achieve this? After all, we can't be optimistic that the Arab bourgeois regime, Saudi Arabia, is going to do anything. Fatah has failed, the PA has failed. You know, I mean, the Hamas also is a problem. The regional powers are corrupt. The Israeli Zionist bourgeois left, like Gantz and, Meretz and all of them, pretty hopeless. So really, where do you see this coming from? We've got a huge movement. We have to organize them.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to address?
Should I start? Yes. Okay. Yeah. I think the first and the third question are really the same, so I'll address them in a moment, and I'll go first to the second one about the strange allies or fellow travelers to the Zionist movement. I don't know if they were strange, but in a sense, like you mentioned the Hindutva and the BJP in India, I don't know if they are strange. It's very clear, and I think Radha mentioned it as well, how many anti-Semitic ideologies were supporting Zionism. And in the book, I bring a conversation between Balfour and Weizmann, Chaim Weizmann, who was the leader of the Zionist movement after Theodor Herzl. And Balfour tells him that he met the daughter of Wagner, the German composer who was a sympathizer of Nazism, Cosima Wagner. And they share this kind of ideas about the Jews, that they talk about it as if it's accepted to talk about these negative features that Wagner, as an anti-Semite, was disseminating in Germany. Think about the leader of Hungary today, Orban, a fascist, an anti-Semite if ever was one, in the sense of anti-Jewish, and the greatest supporter of Israel. Leaders of fascism in France and Italy are great supporters. The EDL is now donning itself with the Israeli flag in demonstrations. So yes, I don't know if to call them strange fellow travelers rather than maybe the genuine fellow travelers of a racist ideology. Now, the first and the third question, as I said, had a lot in it. Three very short points about it. One, as an academic, I'm talking about the beginning of the end of the Zionist project. And the beginning of an end is a long period, can be a long period, unfortunately. And when structures, ideological structure collapse, it can take time in terms of historical time. And these are very dangerous time, because the attempt to keep the structure together can make the leaders of the structure even more brutal and fierce than they were, and we saw it in the last days of apartheid South Africa. So we are into a very bad period in the next year or two, very worrying, not only for the people of the Gaza Strip, but also for the people of the West Bank, who already are beginning to feel the genocidal policies there, and the Palestinian minority in Israel that usually is totally forgotten in these kind of conversation. 2 million people who are also in danger, existential danger. However, in historical terms, the end is coming, and the collapse is coming. In fact, the 7th of October is like an earthquake that shook a building that already had cracks in the foundation. But it widened the cracks extensively. And therefore, I think this accelerates the collapse. What will come instead of the collapse is a very good question, because we have a failed state in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen. Not always a collapse of a state is immediately replaced by something better. There are decolonizations in Africa and Southeast Asia that were not replaced by better regimes for the people. It's the agency of the Palestinian national movement. We are waiting for its finding the way of uniting its forces, restructuring probably its liberation organization. I have a lot of faith in the younger Palestinian generation that they would be able to provide the consensual leadership and structure. We need them to lead the way into the future. It's high time that the Israeli Jews would hear from the Palestinians what they think about the future, rather than the Palestinians hearing all the time what the Israelis think about the future and responding to this. We need this leadership. The potential for this leadership is there. I think from the days that Rada's grandfather was, we have now a very sophisticated, educated, well-versed young Palestinian generation all over the place, and they would show us the way forward. And it would be a free Palestine, and probably quite a lot of Israeli Jews would feel they don't want to live in a post-apartheid state, like some whites didn't want to live in a post-apartheid state. This is not a good enough reason not to pray for this. They might leave or they might stay. It's not the main issue. The main issue is, can we liberate Palestine, and can the liberation bring a much better political structure and life, first for the Palestinians, but also for the Jews who are there, and maybe also influence the rest of the Arab world.
Thank you. And Rada?
Yes, just a couple of additional points on that last point, on the question of the future state that would replace the current state of Israel. I mean, two issues which are really very important. First of all, the aim of a democratic state in which the people who live within it are equal citizens it seems to me, is inevitable. If providing that the Israelis are not enabled to ethnically cleanse the Palestine, so that there are Palestinians remaining, it seems to me there is no escape from this as an endpoint. Not talking in terms of how wonderful and all the rest. Really, it is inevitable. That's the first thing. The second issue that I wanted to follow up on what Ilan was saying, there really is a problem for the Palestinians about leadership. It's very paralyzing to all the excellent ideas, the energies that have been released by October 7th, the way people are, in the enthusiasm, that wave of newly energized. It's sad but true that there is an absence of leadership, and this is extremely serious. I personally don't know exactly how it will be resolved, but I know that without it, all these aims, ideas, and so on will not be realized.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with both Ilan and Rada. I think and on the question of agency, the Palestinian agency is essential, i.e., Palestinians would have to take the leading role. I do expect some Israelis to join us, and I do think we can see fractures within that Israeli society. But settler colonial societies actually don't change easily, and don't change quickly, and don't change for the better. And it's certainly becoming slightly more fascist and more racist and more out of touch with reality. And a lot of Israeli liberals are moving out, and who is remaining within Israel is more fanatical. But I do think actually the Palestinian society it has been resisting for a whole century now. And generation after generation, that society does bring up new leadership. But the current octogenarian leadership in Palestine is not working, and I do agree with Ghada. And that leadership, quality of leadership, the caliber of the Mandelas and the Tutus, and it has got to emerge from within that society, enormous amount of energies. And that society does throw up new generation and new leadership. It's a question of watching the signs but I do think along the lines also there are many threats to us Palestinians, and the dangers haven't passed. I do think that isolated society, that boycotted society is more likely to continue its crimes, genocide, atrocities, attempts to ethnic cleanse Palestinians actually from parts of the West Bank. We know there's a war going on in the West Bank, which is not reported on the BBC, much of the focus on release of 4 Israeli hostages. Nobody mentioned the killing of 92 Palestinians at the same time, by the way. The British media hasn't mentioned that. So there's a lot of risk, danger, threats to us, crimes, genocide. And I think we need to be aware that the more that settler colonial society is isolated, the more it's likely to be savage, by the way, and the more it is likely to go, the question of crusaders and that sort of thing. So that the threats for us, existential threats for us as Palestinians are still there. But we are still there. Half of us are still there. About 7.5 million Palestinians are still living between the river and the sea. And so I think potentially, we surviving and resisting and looking for long-term solutions, rather instant solutions, or magical solutions, or quick solutions, or quick fixes within a year or two. I think we need to have deep breath, and we Palestinians especially, we need to build up our own leadership and to think about slightly medium-term and long-term things, because I think if you expect magical solution and miraculous solutions after this horrific genocide in Gaza, I think you are going to be disappointed. So I think, it's a question of persistent. It's a question of we are incredibly resilient people, and I've seen so much resilience in Gaza itself, actually. How incredibly, the Palestinian resistance in Gaza for 8 months is something I did not expect. That resistance in Palestine will allow the international movement to grow and become bigger. You'll have support and you'll have solidarity. If we stop resisting, our solidarity will fade away, actually. So when we talk about these students, these mass movements, these mass things, I think they are linked to the question of resisting in Palestine. And that's the heart of the matter.
Thank you. Before I come to another round, just a couple of things. I was, the irony sometimes, the laughability sometimes. The fact that Israeli press, many headlines are celebrating the rise of far-right parties in the European elections, forgetting somehow that these are the fascists of yesterday, and they were the ones who, drove the Jews out of Europe and created the pogroms and the such is in itself laughable. And also in regards with what you've just said, Noor, and I think that most people here would agree. Listening to the news just before I came on the BBC, and the statement by the US State Secretary Antony Blinken saying, you know, it's a very novel event that 14 members have all said yes, and now everyone is waiting for Hamas. The whole world now is waiting for Hamas. I mean, I don't know whether he realized what he was saying, whether he was advised or not, but you know, I think in retrospect, I think he said something that he would come to regret. But in any case, the next round of questions, the gentleman here. I will take the gentleman there next to the wall, and someone from the back. Yes, at the very back, the final row. So the gentleman here, please.
Thank you, Professor Ina, for supporting the Palestinian cause. First question, please. Do you see any difference between lobbying in United States and Europe countries, Britain including? And do you think there are any, if Donald Trump come president, will be support more from Biden to support Israel state? And finally, please, how do you see the problem now inside Israeli society between the secularism and between the extreme Zionist religion? And we see yesterday Gallant, he resigned from Benny Gantz, and Gallant don't vote against low recruitment of Haredim people. How do you see this will be influence in Israel state? Thank you.
The gentleman there, fifth row, the fourth row next to the wall, yes. No, if you can wait for the microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My question is around a concept that I've been very puzzled with for the last 8 months around Muslim Zionists. That according to Islam and the Quran, it has been written according to various verses that Allah has stated clearly that Israel belongs to the Jews. So what I've understood is that according to the Hasbara that I have reviewed, Israel has positioned itself as the steward of anti-Islamization and that steward against the fight between the civilizations, the Western civilizations, and Islamic fundamentalism. So how do you view these claims that what the Muslim Zionists are saying, that the establishment or the existence of Israel is actually enshrined in the Quran? So I was asking, why didn't the Israeli planes, instead of distributing leaflets, distribute the verses of the Quran to the people in Gaza so that they could have vacated? Then they said one-fifth of Israeli population are actually untrustworthy, and they are hell-bent on the destruction of Israel, so all the Arab Israelis. So what's your views on this Muslim Zionist views, please?
The gentleman at the very back of the hall.
Okay, thank you. So I'm from Colombia. The Colombian president say, if Palestine dies, humanity dies. When he was breaking relations with Israel. So my question is, what I believe is very important for all states to follow it, but my question is, how important it is to isolate the Zionist state if we want to build a better world?
Thank you. Okay, then.
Yeah. The first question was about the US and UK in differences. Yeah. Of course, there are differences because the United States political system works differently than the British system. For instance, the electoral system works differently, and therefore the lobbies for Israel and Zionism adapted themselves to the political reality. Also, lobbying in America is a bit more complex because it's part of the regular work of politics. But I think that despite these differences, it is the Anglo-Saxon world, if you want. You can include Australia in this. This whole section of Western civilization of the English-speaking world, and they have their allies, of course, in the continent as well. They decided to deal with the racism that they have shown for centuries against the Jews by getting easily out of this really dark history by supporting the colonization of Palestine and now the destruction of Palestine. So, sorry. So I think while there are tactical differences and characteristical differences because of the different political realities and system, it is, as I say in the book, I talk about it as a relay race that you have in the Olympics, when one runner passes the baton to another runner. So in many ways, Britain passed the baton to America as being the major international actor that provides immunity. So, but in the book itself, you can see more about the differences. Second question was about Donald Trump. I think one of the problems of the lobby in America would be that as I show in the book, they have decided, probably since 2005, to put almost all the eggs in the basket of the Republican Party. And are less interested in the Democratic Party, although they can see that the inertia of being pro-Israeli in the Democratic Party of a certain generation still works. But where I think they might be wrong is that they don't fully understand the difference in the Republican camp between the supremacist right-wing conservatives and the Christian Zionists. Christian Zionists probably would support Israel, but there is an isolationist element in the Republican Party. For example, those who did not want to support the Ukraine, not in the sense of not supporting it symbolically, but refused to use American taxpayer to pay money for weapons going to the Ukraine and Israel, if you remember, when it was together. So I think it's, I was in the heart of Arab America, Michigan, Dearborn, and I was asked again and again, what do you suggest to us? Should we vote for Trump or Biden or not vote, which is actually voting? And of course, you're very careful in not being an American to tell people how to vote. But I said, unfortunately, this is a tactical question and not a strategic question. Namely, both of them are bad news for the Palestinians, and both of them, at least initially, are good news for the fascist Israel that is unfolding in front of our eyes. However, and therefore I suggested investing more in strategic thinking rather than in the tactical question of whom to vote for in November, and leave it for people individually to decide what to do, because the two choices are terrible. There is no real independent candidate, unfortunately, in America they could go for. The question of the implosion of the Israeli society from within, I think I write about it in the book as well, towards the end of the book, this kind of what I call the state of Judea, the settler state that is taking over Israel, a more theocratic, more extreme version of Zionism, messianic Zionism, that takes over Israel slowly and gradually, first electorally, but also through the apparatus of the army, the secret service, the Mossad, the universities. All these old elites are giving in to a new kind of messianic Zionism that is far more powerful than the secular or liberal sort of, so to speak, Zionism. Both of them believed in apartheid Israel, but they had different versions of apartheid Israel. And so I think, again, I don't like tactical commentary where the gallant, it matters so much. Not because I don't respect this kind of commentary. I'm just, maybe because I'm an historian, I'm much more interested in the wider picture. And the wider picture is that this internal implosion is another crack in the structure, and a very important crack. And the 7th of October widened extensively that crack as well. And I think that's something to follow and look at. As for Colombia, Muslim Zionists, I wouldn't pay too much attention to this phenomenon because we know the names of all of them. Yeah. As for Colombia, and the global south. Yes, it is, of course, it is very important. We have this global Israel and global Palestine, and we have the beginning of countries in the global south willing to go beyond boycott and divestment into real sanction, ceding diplomatic relationship. We need the global north to follow. But maybe that's the historical process. You begin with the global south, you move to the civil society in the global north, and hopefully the country, also the states, the governments in the future of the global north would do this. We need this kind of isolation. We need this kind of pressure. And we need, and that's very difficult to ask the people in Gaza and the West Bank, but we need to hold our breath because it will take a bit of time for this to unfold. But it's not fair to say to the people who need this, not tomorrow, but yesterday. So we have to double and triple also our efforts, at least to give some hope for the end of the genocide, even if it doesn't mean yet the kind of liberation that we are all dreaming about. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I have read the Quran so many times. I've never heard about this kind of rubbish. But there's a lot of rubbish on the internet. Don't believe everything you see on the internet, by the way. And it's usually one person who kind of spreads all these lies. And I think there is that immediate thing, which is called elections in Britain and in the US. And there is the choice between these two terrible people. One is called Joe genocide, and the other one is Trump genocide. I mean, these are terrible choices. But there is also, the Zionist lobby in America is a coalition, is a wide coalition. But there's an element in that Zionist lobby which is incredibly dangerous and extremely dangerous. And these are the Armageddon theology people. We don't know how many followers they have. Some people think they have tens of thousands of votes, evangelical votes, and they will give their votes to Trump. They think Trump is somehow a new messiah. But the threat from that direction, I mean, some of these organizations, till evangelical organizations, they have millions of followers. John Hagee has got about 2 million followers, and he seems to be pouring a lot of money in Israeli settlements, and in also Israeli settlements in Silwan, in Palestine, Israeli archaeology, and also the risk of these people. They are actually celebrating genocide. They're not just, their idea of expediting the Messiah and Greater Israel and the support for Israel is also focuses on who is impeding the coming of the Messiah. And the Palestinians are seen to be in the way of impeding the coming of the Messiah. Therefore, the question of eliminating the Palestinians, the question of genocide in Gaza, they seem to be incredibly proud of it and incredibly celebrating it. It's a strange kind of phenomena. It's not reported very much in the British media, but I've come across a lot of statements for some of the people saying Palestine's finished, that's it. So the risk for those supporters of Greater Israel in America with so many votes, and also with the idea that you expediting the Messiah by creating Greater Israel, also you have to eliminate those people who are in the way of the Messiah or Greater Israel, and the Palestinians seems to be kind of in the way of things. There's a lot of, if you like, I shall call it, they call it Armageddon theology. I want to call it a genocidal theology. and that implication is also, it seems to be impacted on the US in particular, less on Britain, because Britain is more of a secular society here. And it's more, I mean, someone like Sunak, who's a Hindu Zionist, he's an opportunist also. He thinks, there's a mileage in that kind of mentality. I notice Sajid Javid, the British cabinet secretary, when he was home secretary, also wanted to celebrate the Balfour Declaration, which I thought very strange for a Muslim cabinet secretary wanted to celebrate the Balfour Declaration in Britain. But again, it's that kind of opportunism of some of these people, and I think they need to be exposed. And that hypocrisy needs to be exposed. So that kind of collection of hypocritical people are usually opportunists, and they think the Zionists are so powerful. Let's be on their side, if you like. And I think that trend is slightly different from the American Armageddon theology people who are incredibly dangerous, incredibly also believe in that nonsense, also pouring a lot of money into Israeli settlements and into settlements in East Jerusalem, for instance.
I want to make 2 points. First one, to address the colleague from Colombia and the need to isolate the Zionist state. In fact, a global anti-apartheid movement is beginning to take shape, particularly from the south, starting in the south, but with tremendous support from the global north also. Much of the leadership is coming from Africa, from South Africa, and what we call the frontline states during the anti-apartheid struggle. A conference was organized in Johannesburg about 2 weeks ago, and the foundations were laid for that. People from your part of the world, from Bolivia in particular, Brazil, were there, and I'm hopeful that we would see in the near future some developments on that front. A point I want to make before we close off is that on the issue of lobbying, we're not speaking about governments only. We're speaking about the role of the lobby in the media. And in Ilan's book, he spoke about people who worked with the BBC. Andrew Falls, who was dismissed from the BBC because of his pro-Palestinian stance. And when we look at how the debate is being framed by the BBC, in the context of recent events, let's say the celebration, commemoration of D-Day, and the right of the French to resist, and Britain to help, its noble acts of support for the French resistance against occupation. Juxtapose that with what's happening in Palestine, you see. And the BBC, at the beginning in October last year, whenever they mentioned the word Hamas, they had to say Hamas is designated a terrorist organization by the government. Every time a newscaster uttered the word Hamas, she or he had to say this. And that contributed to the shaping of the framing of your understanding of what's happening in Palestine, and to negate the right of the Palestinian people to resist. Many of us in this room probably are too scared to say that resistance is lawful when your country is occupied by a foreign force, you see. But it was lawful in Ukraine, as Liz Truss called upon British people to go and fight for the Ukrainians, but she would never had called for anyone to go to Palestine, who were also under occupation. So when we talk about the lobby and its power, it should not only be confined to governments, but also to the media, which plays an important role in shaping our understanding of the issues.
Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. I have many hands still, but this is going to be the final round. We only have about 10 to 15 minutes at most, after which I'm going to ask Ilan only to come back, if I may. So, I am going to ask everyone not to be more than 20 seconds. Okay? And I'm going to cut them off. So, Dr. Maha, the gentleman there, from this side, this gentleman, that gentleman, and this lady. Okay, we'll take these very quick comments. Please, Dr. Maha here. Apologies to anyone whom I'm passing by. Yes, please. Yeah, good. Okay, done. Tafadhal.
Thank you, Professor Ilan, and to the panelists, and I very much look forward to reading the book. There is a bit of lobbying that's going to come up more clearly, which is worrying me, although it was very interesting hearing about the history of the lobbies in America and in the UK, and the continuing lobbying, as Dr. Abdullah said, through the media and so on. But it's the political agenda that I am most fearful of. And the next stage, where we're going to hear more and more talk of establishing a Palestinian state. And we're hearing it from Cameron and various politicians in the West in order to save the colonial settler state of Israel. And the buy-in in that lobbying that's going to come from Arab leaders and Palestinians themselves. And it is, I think, that stage that I am most fearful of and for which we've got to be prepared, because the resistance on the ground has been formidable. It has been strong, and the Palestinian people have resisted for 76 years and have shown their greatest resilience today in Gaza. We must not lose that. And it is how we stand up to this new lobbying, this idea that there can be a political solution that's going to reinvent Gaza in some way through support of the treacherous Arab regimes, and with them the Western politicians that will stand with them. I think that is the challenge, and I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very quickly, thank you.
Yes, under the circumstances, I'll forego my question for one of the ladies, but I just want to say that I have it on good authority that when Michael Gove was at university, he was pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
Right, if that's so, then I don't know what happened to him. Secondly, I read that Edward Said was taken around the settlements by his friend Israel Shahak, and he was very hopeful the settlement was going to be destroyed. And Israel Shahak told him, no, there's only two things that's going to happen to destroy these settlements. One is an act of God, and the second is a mighty military. Nothing else is going to destroy these settlements.
Thank you very much. The gentleman here, please.
That's all the question. It's a prediction.
I'm coming to some of our lady audience. That's fine.
Detroit
I'll have you, yes.
interrogation. When you were in Detroit airport interrogation, do you think your book will be allowed in U.S. to be on the shelves? Second, the academic level, the lobbying at the academic level does it have been addressed in your book? Because after this students' movement, we have seen so many universities have linkage to to Israel. And then I was just wondering how the Christians have changed from the time John Paul VI, he said that Jews are no more responsible on the killing of the Jews, and how they changed gear to be in supportive of Israel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The gentleman just behind, and then I'm coming to the lady in the middle. Yes.
I'm replying to one of the questions from, I think it was Dr. Jada. She asked, was there anything similar to Zionism? Yes, there is, Ulster Unionism. That started in 1614. And Balfour set up a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people. But the gallant and brave IRA got rid of it. But now the Ulster Unionists, they're on their last legs because we, the native Irish, have outnumbered the settlers. Thank you very much. Ulster Unionism is going to end, and Zionism is going to end. And I have a brief question. The question is, should a new anti-apartheid movement be set up to deal with the way we dealt with apartheid in South Africa? Should it be set up again to deal with apartheid in Israel?
Thank you very much. The lady there at the back, raise your hands, please. Raise your hands so the microphone can come to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, why is Egypt and Saudi Arabia not part of the Global South and supporting the Palestinian cause? I'm just wondering what made them turn.
Excellent, thank you. And can I have the lady there, just the lady over there? There we go.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, how do you interpret the significance of the Zionist lobby's use of Islamophobic tropes to delegitimize the Palestinian resistance and activism in the UK and the US, and whether that could be the explanation behind the odd union that we see between the fascists and the Zionist lobby, that they're prioritizing the Muslim problem over the Jewish problem?
Thank you very much. And I will take the gentleman here, and then we'll come to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the panel and to Professor Ilham. my name is Shabir. I'm a Muslim, but with a Semite, with a Hebrew name. So there are Muslims with a Semitic sort of name as well. My question is very quickly. One, Professor Ilan was talking about that the politicians of today are really ignorant, stupid, unenlightened, you know, all the words I can't remember that he used. But we also see the youngsters in the universities in USA and here are really going against the creme de la creme universities, whether it's Oxford, London. At one time when I was studying in London in the 70s, LSE, Essex, Warwick were sort of a hotbed of revolution, but now they've become right-wing universities. So is there something going wrong with the elite institute itself that has brought about this sort of shallowness of the leaders of today? That's one question. Finally, quick question. We haven't talked about Iran's role and how it has supported the axis of resistance.
Thank you very much. Ilan. Okay, we're gonna hear from Ilan, but I'm also going to come to every member of the panel for a final word, as well as to come back on some of the comments. But please, Ilan.
Yeah. Let me start with the two-state solution and the worry that this would come now as a paradigm that dominates the conversation on Palestine, or maybe even lead to an attempt to impose it. I'm less worried about it, I must say, than you are, because I think that the talk about the two-state solution now pales in comparison to the talk about the two states during the time of Oslo. The time of Oslo, the two-state was a Nobel Peace Prize celebration, and yet it evaporated. It disappeared. I think the same will happen now. It's a conversation that was already irrelevant to the reality on the ground in 1993. It's even less relevant today to what goes on. The way the Israeli electorate is moving towards the right, the large number of settlers in the West Bank, the mood among the global society and the global South. I think that we will hear a lot about the two-state solution from all those actors who are interested in maintaining the status quo rather than changing it. So I think that it's not going to happen. It's unfortunate because it wastes energy and time and space for the more important discussion. And that's what the two-state solution did. For so many years, we wasted time and energy, because building a one-state is also not an easy project. But we wasted 56 years of not talking about it and not building it. So that is the main worry for me, rather than I can see this. In fact, I changed my mind about the recognition of Palestine. I don't know what Noor and Rada feel about it. I remember when it came about 10 years ago, I was afraid that the recognition of Palestine meant recognizing the Bantustan of Area A, the greater Ramallah area. And I said, why are we pushing for an international recognition of a Bantustan? I think today this goes much more with a symbolic recognition that Palestine is still there. It's against denialism that this kind of recognition comes in the wake of the way the Americans and the British and the others are giving immunity to Israel. So it's not about recognizing Palestine in a certain geographical space. It's making sure that Palestine does not disappear, and this is part of the transformation that I hope will come to the politics from above and not just politics from below. There was a question about the academic lobby. Well, I think, I'm sorry, about the lobby in the academia, and it came out in different questions here, so I'll summarize it together. Yes, I do talk in the book about how the academia is used within lobby structure. But and it comes back to how the universities react to the encampments and student movements. We have to remember that universities are two things. There are managements and almost run like businesses, and there are also community of scholars. As management and businesses, they are definitely following the government and the politics from above. As communities, like the rest of the civil society, I think they offer something different, and therefore it's part of my hope for a different kind of politics, which also would include the way universities react, and maybe they will be part of this global anti-apartheid movement that was mentioned here, which I call global Palestine, that needs to be confront global Israel. The global Israel, which is made of countries in the global north, multinational cooperation, security firms, military industries, Christian Zionists, and unfortunately still some Jewish communities. There was a question about if my book in the US because I was detained. No, I don't think it will be a problem. Novin is here, and he told me the book was already printed in the US, so we smuggled it in. No, it's okay. It's working in the US. Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Well, I think that like so many other parts of the world, we have rulers. We don't have leaders. We used to have leaders in the Arab world, but now we have rulers. Rulers work differently than leaders, and we just would have to hope that even from their perspective of efficiency or what they would deem as profitable politically or economically, whatever, they would find that supporting Israel or even the two-state solution is not beneficial. But this would not be out of a moral assessment or because of taking a lead, but just because as rulers, it contributes to they would think that it contributes to their survival as leaders. So we need a change there as well. Islamophobia, yes, of course, it's one of the many ways that Israel weaponizes ideas in order to silence criticism on Israel and suppress the freedom of expression. One, of course, is accusing everyone who criticizes Israel as being either a Holocaust denier or an anti-Semite, and then trying to show that Israel is fighting against Islamic extremism, and it's the only real hope for defending Europe from the danger of Islamic radicalism and so on. So it is part of it. It was always part of it. I think Noor mentioned Lloyd George. One of the things Lloyd George wrote is, God forbid if the Muslim would rule the Holy Land. So Islamophobia was also part of the support for Zionism earlier on, not just nowadays. And it's worthwhile of a good research. We don't have maybe some of you, the younger generation, who in a university would take it on. It's a good topic for a PhD to work on. I'm willing to supervise it with Noor together. With Noor together. Okay, Iran. Yes, of course, the regional, as a regional power, it puts a counter force to the United States, to the power of Israel. My very modest contribution to this is that Iran, that respects a bit more the rights of its own citizens, would be even more powerful as an influence on the region, and we need Iran to influence the region. But it needs also to get its own acts together. You cannot do this as it stands now, and it has the power. It has the power to de-Americanize the Middle East, to create a different kind of realities that bring us back to the live and let live matrix and mosaic that used to be the Eastern Mediterranean in particular before the arrival of Zionism and before the colonialist power imposed the nation-state, Westphalian nation-state idea on the Eastern Mediterranean through the Sykes-Picot Agreement and all the agreements that came behind it. So we need Iraq, we need Turkey, we need the regional powers, but in order, they also have to go through some reforms in order to be a powerful influencer on the well-being and future of everyone who lives in that region.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ilan. Bravo.
Yes, thank you. Okay. I'm going to be very brief because I can see how time has gone on. Just a few very small points, because Ilan has answered the points raised so fully and so correctly. First of all, the question about the Palestine state. I really understand your anxiety. I really do. However, I too have chosen to or have decided that it needs to be seen as a recognition of Palestinian statehood, meaning the right to statehood. That if we look at it like that, then I think it puts it into a better light. The gentleman who talked about Ulster is spot on, because actually the parallel for what has happened in Palestine, the better parallel, other than apartheid South Africa, is Ireland. The story of Ireland is so instructive. There are so many points of comparison and of agreement between our histories. So thank you for bringing that up. And finally, just about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, one of our tragedies in the Arab world is not only that the role of imperialism and what it led to in terms of setting up Israel, destroying the Palestinians. It destroyed the Arab world, really. And we need to see it much more like that in the context of these states are not real states in the proper sense of the word. They're not fully independent. They've come into being, they've had a bit of luck because they've got oil and they've got a bit of money. But other than that, really they have to be seen as a tragic outcome themselves of imperialism, Western imperialism. And, my final word, of course, the evening belongs to Ilan. And thanks again, Ilan, for producing this wonderful book.
Yeah, I do want to second that and thank Ilan for his brilliance. Also, it's a lifelong, actually, struggle with us, actually. So it's not tonight, it's not last year. You've been around for such a long time. And it's really, it gives me tremendous, actually, hope that you are with us. Let me just focus on this question of Kamran. Maha said something about Kamran, actually, too. I actually won't worry too much about Kamran. He's maneuvering. I won't even worry about Starmer. He's also maneuvering. He wants a Palestinian state within a peace process. When was the last time we had a peace process? 20 years ago, 30 years, 50 years ago? It's just lies, lies, lies. I think we need to be careful about these lies and not to take them always very seriously, but they are actually problematic. But Ilan actually pointed out there is something interesting happening with Spain, with Ireland, with Norway, with more countries joining in. Spain is mentioning sanctions. This is happening, and it symbolically is important actually for us, happening from above. So, but I think to give us hope, us as activists, and Palestinians and people who need to give some sort of guidance, if you like, some sort of guiding hand. I think we need to say Palestinians have the right to resist, they have the right to self-determination, they have the right to demonstrate against apartheid, down with apartheid, boycott the state of Israel, BDS. All these things are happening around us and in the demonstrations, in the student movements, on campuses, the divestment. I think we have a lot of energy coming from below from the younger generation, whether it's in Palestine or here. And I think this gives us a lot of hope, and hopefully also will impact on people from above and those who are in powers. But I do see a great deal of change within British society for the first time in years and years and years. And I think it kind of surprised me how much British society from below, lawyers, civilians, professionals, artists, producers, an awful lot of people are coming and actually joining in. This gives us a lot of energy, a lot of hope, a lot of inspiration. And I think we should be proud of it, and we should keep pushing it. Thank you so much.
I'll close on one of the highlights of the book. One of the things that stood out to me is what the myth that has been propagated throughout America for many decades. And that is, if you want to be a good Jew, you have to be a Zionist. And if you have to be a Zionist, you must go to Israel. If you can't go to Israel, then support it. This has been deconstructed in the book, and it delinks the whole question of Zionism, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitism. And I think that is crucial in terms of our understanding and our approach to the support for the Palestinian people, that we don't conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, as the ruling authorities in Israel would like us to believe, and their lobby.
Thank you very much. Okay. Everyone, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, if you bear with me just for 1 minute, I'd like to firstly thank all the staff and volunteers from the Cordoba Foundation Memo and One World Publications who have put together tonight. Remind you once again, don't leave without a copy, probably even a few copies. The recordings will be available on the organizers' platforms, and please do support and get involved with the Cordoba Foundation and with Middle East Monitor. Tonight has been a pleasure, but like Ghada said, tonight belongs to Ilan Pappé. He's not only a brilliant author, he's not only a brilliant academic, but let's use the proper words. He is a courageous, ethical, moral compass for all of us. He's a model. And thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Hi. Yeah, just a minute. I just have to organize my things. I'll do this. Or maybe I'll sign here. Okay.